Well, a biotech company called Colossal just announced something wild. They say they've brought back a direwolf from extinction. But did they really? What they've really done is way stranger, and maybe even more important. Their team has just created a brand new predator. Not a clone, not a revival, but a new species. These cute cubs are built from gene-edited wolves, shaped by ancient DNA and born through cutting-edge biotech. So wait, are the Jurassic Park horrors coming for us? Well, let's see. Now, direwolf was the massive muscular predator that roamed North America thousands of years ago. Most people think these were just some sort of bigger gray wolves, but don't be tricked by appearances and the name. In 2021, a landmark study came out. A team of researchers in major institutions studied actual direwolf DNA and discovered something shocking. These guys weren't just big gray wolves, not even close. They were separate animals. Genetically, direwolves split off from wolves roughly 6 million years ago. Just to put that in perspective, humans and chimps split about 6 to 7 million years ago. So direwolves and gray wolves are as different from each other as we are from chimpanzees. They look similar because of the so-called convergent evolution, when two species evolve similar traits because they live in similar environments. Think of sharks and dolphins, both streamlined, both predators, both ocean hunters, but different animals, and dolphins are way cuter. So Colossal said that they revived this animal, a dramatic and bold claim. But it's not quite true. In reality, they genetically engineered a new kind of wolf. It's not a direwolf, it's not even a known species. It's a synthetic animal, one that's never existed before. And this is a massive deal, both incredible and terrifying. The company basically has taken gray wolves and modified their genes by mixing them up with some direwolf DNA they found. Which is kind of wild, because, as we said, these two animals aren't really relatives, they're completely different species. The Colossal company kind of ignored that, though. They say the gray wolf is the closest living relative to a direwolf, and that the data proves it. But what data? They haven't shown it so far, it's just a claim. Why are they even calling this a direwolf? Well, they're saying their cubs are close enough to a direwolf and maybe fill the same role in an ecosystem. Basically, if it behaves like a direwolf, walks like a direwolf, and preys like a direwolf, doesn't that count? Sounds kinda dire to me. Well, if we're being honest with words, then not really. Biologically, genetically, evolutionarily, this is now a modified gray wolf. So, how good or bad is it? Let's figure it out. The good part is that the research like this might help us restore the planet's ecosystem and ecology. Colossal and similar teams are trying to develop technologies that could be used for especially important causes. We don't notice it in daily life, but species are quietly, constantly disappearing. Scientists estimate that over 1 million species are at risk right now. When ecosystems lose a species, especially because of humanity's actions, it's like pulling out a block of a Jenga tower. Too many missing blocks, and the whole thing wobbles. But Colossal believes that if we can't bring the exact block back, we can create one that fits closely enough to stabilize the structure. For example, they've also worked on cloning red wolf-coyote hybrids. This might help repopulate U.S. ecosystems where red wolves once thrived. All the tools these scientists invented might even help with currently endangered species. Another genuinely mind-blowing part is that scientists working with Colossal found real, usable DNA from direwolves. That alone is a massive achievement. We do have direwolf fossils, tons of them from the La Brea tar pits. Hey, don't stick your toe in there. But those fossils are soaked in tar. Because of that, their DNA is usually ruined. But the team managed to find some direwolf bones that are over 12,000 years old. These specimens gave researchers enough material to begin building a direwolf genome. Not a full one, but a basic blueprint. Even if we ignore the wild new species part, this achievement is still huge because it'll help us study the extinct direwolves in more detail. We might now learn more about this animal than we ever did before. It's literally molecular archaeology. Now, all this is great, up to a point. The controversial part is, of course, the Jurassic Park one. We're not just preserving species anymore. We're starting to pull some shenanigans with it. Of course, this immediately raised tons of concerns. Both regular people and scientists are now debating heavily about this and show a lot of skepticism. Another problem is that actual ecosystems are way more complex than Jenga puzzle pieces. They're full of moving parts, millions of them, all adjusting to each other constantly. So, if you throw a new type of wolf into the mix, it won't react exactly the way a direwolf once did. The times have changed, the ecosystem has changed, the extinction happened, nature adjusted, and throwing these cubs into the wild now might be even more destabilizing. That's why these new wolves aren't being released into the wild. They won't be hunting bison or roaming ancient grasslands. That world is long gone. Their prey is gone. Their ecosystem is gone. Instead, they'll stay to live in the lab. But if we do start to put our own animals into the ecosystem one day, what happens when ecosystems start depending on human-made species to survive? Well, it's like I always say, it's nearly impossible to science your way out of a situation that you behaved yourself into. If you can't change the behavior, the science might only be flashy and not the solution. Anyway, all these are hard and important questions. For now, we might at least exhale with relief that no one is bringing the dinosaurs back. Yeah. DNA doesn't survive more than 1.5 million years, and dinosaur fossils are stone now, not cells. You can't clone from stone. But what about animals that vanished more recently? Creatures that once lived during the Ice Age, or even just a century ago? Those are within reach. The most famous example is the woolly mammoth. These shaggy giants once stomped across the tundras of the north, shaping nature by knocking down trees, flattening snow, and fertilizing soil. Their disappearance helped turn thriving grasslands into mossy, carbon-trapping bogs. Now scientists want to take preserved mammoth DNA from frozen remains, compare it with elephant DNA, identify the key differences, and create a new hybrid. Kind of the same thing we did with these new direwolf cubs. It would be a cold-resistant, tundra-stomping, woolly-coated mammoth elephant. Like that. These guys would be close enough to fill the ecological niche that mammoths once held. Then there's also the passenger pigeon. Once the most abundant bird in North America, flocks so massive they could block out the sun, but we hunted them to extinction by the early 1900s. The last one, named Martha, passed away in a zoo in 1914. But we have her DNA preserved in museum samples. And today, using AI and genomics, scientists are working to recreate a living bird that behaves like a passenger pigeon. These birds could help regenerate forests, spread seeds, and restore a part of the lost sky. And finally, the Tasmanian tiger, a striped wolf-like marsupial that once roamed Australia. It was hunted to extinction in the 20th century. But its DNA is abundant. Museums collected pelts, fossils, and even preserved pups. This one was a keystone species, a stabilizer, a hunter that helped keep ecosystems in check. So they want to restore this one as well. The idea is to bring back extinct species using artificial intelligence, genetic sequencing, and the rapidly growing toolbox of biotech. But all this has to be done very carefully. Otherwise, the species could destabilize the environment instead of helping it. Now, on the good side, even if we never bring a mammoth back, this research is already saving lives. For example, the northern white rhino. There are only 5 left, and only 1 male among them. Extinction is practically written into their future. But using preserved cells and cloning techniques, scientists are working on rebuilding the population. In any case, it looks like we're entering a new era of biology, and this discovery is going to start a conversation that will be going on for decades.
Antarctica wasn't always a frozen wasteland. A long time ago, it was full of life, and 56 million years ago, something terrifying stalked its jungles. A giant, flesh-eating bird. It was around 6 feet tall and weighed as much as a lion. For millions of years, nothing could challenge it, so why did it disappear? And could there be even bigger predators still hidden beneath the ice? Paleontologists found 2 massive claw bones in Antarctica, sharp, curved, and powerful, belonging to this bird. They were dug up from the Epresian-aged rocks of Seymour Island, which means they're around 40 to 50 million years old. Their shape left no doubt. These were the so-called terror birds. Their scientific name is Forest rosity, some of the most fearsome predators to ever walk the earth. They were flightless and didn't even need wings. Instead, they could sprint at breakneck speeds, like ostriches from a nightmare. For millions of years, these birds ruled South America. But now, for the first time, their presence has been confirmed in Antarctica. No surprise here. Back then, South America and Antarctica were still connected, allowing animals to easily commute between continents. So these birds probably migrated south to adapt to life on Antarctica's prehistoric landmass. It didn't just survive here, it thrived. But at some point, this nightmare of an animal vanished. Why? Most likely because of the temperature changes. Antarctica was cooling, slowly turning into the frozen wasteland we know today. Its prey may have declined, leaving the predator without enough food. Eventually, it disappeared, leaving no descendants behind. Researchers hope that they'll find a complete skeleton eventually. They're also wondering where there might be even bigger species waiting to be discovered. Perhaps these birds evolved into a completely new Antarctic lineage. But for now, all we have are two giant, creepy claws. People often think that there are almost no animals or plants in Antarctica. But that's not true at all. Penguins waddle around, and forget the cute tiny ones. Antarctica used to have 6-foot-tall monsters. The emperor penguins are the largest penguin species alive today. They can dive over 1,800 feet deep and hold their breath for over 20 minutes. There were giant ancient penguins around 38 million years ago. They were the size of humans. Fossils show they had long, sharp beaks, making them terrifying hunters of fish and squid. The fish there are also absolutely fascinating. Forget giant squids. Colossal squids are nightmares even bigger. Some reach over 40 feet long with massive, super sharp beaks and eyes the size of dinner plates. Finally, orcas, the apex predators of the Antarctic Ocean. They hunt in packs, working together like a wolf pack of the sea to take down seals, fish, and even massive whales. There are even tiny plants like moss and algae, Antarctic hairgrass and pearlwort. They somehow survive against all odds. There are many other myths going on about Antarctica. For example, some people think that when icebergs break off from glaciers, they immediately start drifting straight into the open ocean until they melt. But the reality is way more chaotic. First, when an iceberg breaks off from a glacier or ice shelf, it has to deal with underwater obstacles. It can stay stuck on the seafloor for decades without moving. Then, they get caught in powerful whirlpools and spin in place for months. One iceberg, a 23A, spent nearly 40 years frozen in place before finally breaking free, only to get caught in a swirling ocean vortex for another 8 months. After that, their paths are influenced by ocean currents, tides, winds, and even underwater topography. They don't just float freely. Their movements are full of literal, unexpected twists. And speaking of glaciers, another strange rumor is that some humans can't travel more than 311 miles inland in Antarctica because of an impassable ice wall, freezing jet fuel, deadly winds, and no oxygen. But this is completely false. Antarctica has been explored by planes, vehicles, and even scientists on foot. There's an entire research station sitting at the South Pole. People live there all year long. The ice wall is real, a massive ice cliff rising above the ocean. But that isn't some secret barrier, it's an ice shelf. These are thick slabs of ice that form when glaciers slowly flow off the land and spread over the ocean. Almost 3/4 of Antarctica's coastline is made up of them, but they don't form some giant ring around the world. Antarctica is one of the most extreme places on Earth, but we've conquered its challenges, and we keep learning more about it every year. That's why every year, millions of dollars are poured into keeping research stations running, protecting wildlife, and making sure the people who live there have everything they need. But where does all this money go? Well, Antarctica stations are basically small cities. There's electricity, heating, water purification, food storage, and medical facilities. The biggest station, McMurdo, is basically a town with over 1,000 people in summer. It has everything from a fire station to a gym. The South Pole Station is super deep inland, so it's one of the hardest places to supply. Getting food and fuel there requires airplanes flying thousands of miles in extreme cold. But the internet loves a good mystery. When Google Maps revealed what looked like a massive doorway in Antarctica, conspiracy theorists went wild. People joked about everything from Bigfoot's vacation home to a secret base, or even a Star Trek spaceship hangar hidden in the ice. But there's a way simpler and less exciting explanation. It's actually a grounded iceberg, a chunk of ice that got stuck in shallow water and is now slowly melting. As ice moves across the landscape, it flows around bumps and obstacles, creating odd shapes. The process of melting, breaking apart, and refreezing can carve ice into unexpected forms. Antarctica also has incredibly strong downward-blowing winds that sculpt ice into dramatic formations over time. No secret doorway, unfortunately. And speaking of doors, for years, Ushuaia, Argentina, has been called the gateway to Antarctica, the last stop before the icy continent, the place where expeditions begin. But there's another option. Punta Arenas, Chile. Let's compare them. Ushuaia is closer to Antarctica. It's the top departure point for tourists going on cruises. But no regular flights to Antarctica. No major scientific bases operating from here. It's basically controlled by the military, which refuses to allow private flights, only commercially operated ships. Yes, Punta Arenas is further from Antarctica, but 22 countries and global organizations use it as their main base. There are regular flights to Antarctica happening there every year. Private airlines can actually operate here, making it the real air connection to Antarctica. Ushuaia may have the best location physically, but Punta Arenas actually runs the show. Argentina made a huge error in picking its Antarctic airbase. Instead of setting up a simple, accessible base at sea level, they built Marambio Base, very high on rough terrain, completely impossible to reach by land. Everything has to be flown in by helicopter, making operations slow, expensive, and frustrating. For 50 years, Argentina stubbornly stuck to this bad decision, while Chile set up efficient, well-planned bases that the world now uses. If things don't change, Ushuaia will be nothing more than a tourist stop. But what's terrifying is that Antarctica seems to be returning to its past. It's supposed to be the coldest place on Earth, but something shocking happened just recently. For the first time in recorded history, temperatures in Antarctica broke 68 degrees Fahrenheit. This continent is buried under miles of ice. Usually, temperatures there can drop to minus 112 degrees. But in the winter of 2020, scientists recorded an insane 69 degrees on Seymour Island, hotter than many places in Europe at that time. Scientists believe there are several reasons for that. First, there are changes in the way heat moves around the planet's waters. Second, melting permafrost due to the planet warming. It looks like the climate is changing faster than expected.
If you are one of those folks who can stay up all night and doesn't fancy early wake-ups, you might have some early human Denisovan DNA in you. Now, don't worry, those guys, who were closely related to the Neanderthals, were pretty cool, and it looks like we've got to thank them for inventing fashion. Plus, if you do have Denisovan DNA in you, you could be better adapted to living at high altitudes, have extra muscle strength and endurance, and a stronger immune system. Scientists first discovered Denisovans in 2008 when they found a small piece of a finger bone in Denisova Cave in the Altai Mountains. They learned that the bone belonged to a little girl who was between 5 and 7 years old when she passed away around 40,000 years ago. The cold weather in the cave kept the bone in excellent condition. A couple of years later, another team of researchers managed to extract DNA from the find. They compared it to the DNA of modern humans and another ancient human species, Neanderthals. Her DNA was similar to both, but it was also different enough to show that she was part of an entirely new species of humans. No one had known about this group before. They decided to name it Denisovans, after the cave where they found her tiny finger bone. Later, they discovered 3 more Denisovan fossils, including some teeth, also inside the same cave. Scientists also found Denisovan fossils in caves in China and Laos, and one jawbone with teeth on the Tibetan Plateau, over 10,000 feet above sea level. Scholars used a technique called uranium series dating on the mineral stuck to the bone. They discovered that it was 160,000 years old. It proves that Denisovans lived at high altitudes much earlier than anyone thought ancient humans could. For comparison, Neanderthals rarely went higher than 6,000 feet. Scientists had already found a special gene in Denisovan DNA that helps people survive in low-oxygen environments. But the Siberian cave where Denisovans lived was only 2,300 feet above sea level. Today, many people living in high places like Tibet, including Sherpas and other local groups, have this same helpful gene. It likely entered their DNA thousands of years ago when Denisovans and modern humans mixed. Because this gene made it easier to live in thin air, it became very common in those populations over time thanks to natural selection. It looks like the Denisovans also had wider skulls than those of us or Neanderthals. They also appeared to have no chin. They did have sloping foreheads, long faces, and large pelvises like Neanderthals, and a large dental arch like modern humans. Denisovans had narrower lips and shorter yet wider noses than modern humans. The scientific community still doesn't know where the Denisovans came from, but one theory says they were ancestors of Homo erectus. Those were the oldest known early humans who had modern human-like body proportions, with elongated legs and shorter arms compared to the size of the torso. About 700,000 years ago, some of them traveled from Africa to Eurasia, probably not by bus. These travelers were like the great-great-great-grandparents of the Denisovans and the Neanderthals. Scientists believe that these two groups split up, both in where they lived and in their DNA, around 370,000 years ago. The Neanderthals moved west and settled in Europe and some parts of Western Asia. They lived everywhere, from the Atlantic Ocean in Europe to the Altai Mountains. The Denisovans went in the opposite direction, east into East Asia and Southeast Asia. They even traveled to places like the Philippines and Papua New Guinea and crossed the Wallace Line, which separates Asia from Australia. Researchers have found Denisovan DNA in the genetic code of modern humans from Australia and Melanesia. It's a region in the southwestern Pacific Ocean from Papua New Guinea to the Fiji Islands. Now, it's also possible that you have Denisovan DNA if you come from East Asia, although it's less likely. Central and South Americans also have something Denisovan in their genomes. If you want to be sure, you can take a genetic test that will show the exact percentage, if any. Now, Neanderthals and Denisovans lived in places far from the equator, where the amount of daylight changes a lot with the seasons. Modern humans originally lived closer to the equator, where the length of day and night stays almost the same all year. Scientists think that these differences might have influenced how our internal clocks, called circadian rhythms, evolved to help us wake up, go to sleep, and feel energetic at the right times of the day. In 2017, researchers found that some of the genes that affect how people sleep are linked to latitude, how far north or south someone lives. These genes might have helped ancient humans living in northern areas adjust their body clocks to the changing seasons. Scientists studied DNA from 3 Neanderthals, 1 Denisovan, and 1 modern human. Neanderthals and Denisovans who lived in high-latitude areas, where the amount of daylight changes a lot, had genes that helped them adjust to those light cycles. Modern humans in Africa didn't need those same adaptations because their days and nights stayed more consistent. While modern humans, Neanderthals, and Denisovans had children together, some of their descendants inherited Neanderthal genes that made them more likely to be morning people. Scientists think this wasn't just an evolutionary advantage, but rather a way for their body clocks to adjust more quickly to the changing light in high-latitude regions. A faster internal clock might have helped them wake up and go to bed earlier, which made it easier to adapt to new light patterns. The researchers only studied DNA from 4 ancient humans, and it's hard to tell if these changes in circadian genes were only because of light cycles or also due to other factors, like temperature. Another thing Denisovans probably left behind is fashion. Now, researchers discovered the world's earliest sewing needles with tiny holes for threading in Denisova Cave. These needles date back to the last glacial maximum. Before these fancy needles, people living in the cave used simple tools called bone awls, which didn't have holes for thread. These were fine for making basic clothes, but when the weather turned freezing during the Ice Age, they needed better tools to create more layers of clothing to stay warm. The Denisovans designed the first-eyed needles to stitch together more tightly fitted clothing that could trap heat better. These needles were a big step forward because they allowed for fine sewing that could make their clothes not only warmer, but also more comfortable and durable. Plus, clothes became a way for them to express themselves. Before the Ice Age, people showed off their creativity with body paint and other marks. But when they started covering their skin with clothes to stay warm, they lost those canvases for art. So they began to decorate their clothes instead. Using eyed needles, they could sew beads, fur, and other materials onto their garments and turn simple clothes into works of art. Perhaps it was the beginning of bling. Denisovans sound too good to be true, but they might have passed over one mean gene to you. It helps move zinc around in our cells, and this gene was especially helpful to our ancestors who lived in cold places because it helped them survive the frost. But if there's too much or too little zinc in the body, it might make you predisposed to mental health issues. This gene originally came from people in Asia, but over time it spread to people in Europe, the Americas, and all around the world. Scientists are still trying to figure out why the Neanderthals and Denisovans disappeared, while we, Homo sapiens, survived. The DNA of our extinct long-distance relatives showed that they lived in small groups and often had families within those groups, which might have caused some problems. Our ancestors live in bigger groups with more people and had genetic diversity. This means that there was a mix of traits that can help stay healthier or adapt to changes in weather. Neanderthals and Denisovans didn't have this advantage. Another thing that helped Homo sapiens was the wide social networks that allowed them to share new ideas and tools. So Denisovans probably just couldn't handle the big changes on Earth and adapt to new habitats and disappeared.
What's the scariest predator under the ocean? The crocodile? I don't think so. Loch Ness Monster? Please, it never existed. How about the Chronosaurus? Well, it is extinct, but you might be onto something. Let's take a look at what it'd be like if these creatures were still around today. First things first, what on earth was it? The Chronosaurus was a marine carnivore that lived in the cool, high-latitude Eromanga Sea. It covered vast areas of inland Australia between 90 and 120 million years ago, during the early Cretaceous period. Near-complete fossils of the creature were also found near Colombia, which is a country that has a noted connection to prehistoric reptiles and turtles. This fact makes it extremely possible that the monster I'm about to describe existed worldwide. You might have heard saurus and thought, oh, it's a dinosaur. But these were actually reptiles. They were the largest member of the Plesiosauridae family, referred to as plesiosaurs. Fossil evidence suggests they weighed over 20,000 pounds and were roughly 30 feet in length. Just to put that in perspective, the longest crocodile ever measured was a saltwater crocodile by the name of Lolong from the Philippines. It was 20 feet in length and weighed just under 2,500 pounds. And that's still 10 feet shorter and incredibly lighter than the average Chronosaurus, making the crocodile seem like nothing more than a glorified goldfish in comparison. Despite its terrifying length, the most physically daunting feature of the Chronosaurus was its head. Its skull was about 8 feet long, which was actually proportionally large given the size of its body length. Anything that was unfortunate enough to end up inside the Chronosaurus's mouth may have been given false hope. After all, the teeth of the beast weren't actually that sharp. On second thought, I take that back. I wouldn't feel confident around a toothless snake, let alone being inside the mouth of this monster. But it's true that the Chronosaurus's teeth weren't sharp, especially when compared to other carnivorous reptiles, such as crocodiles and alligators. The teeth of this prehistoric sea creature were instead conical. This means that they were cone-like in shape. Unfortunately, this lack of sharpness didn't make them less dangerous. The teeth were enormous and could be up to 12 inches long from the crown tips to the bottom of the roots. This obviously meant that the Chronosaurus had an extremely powerful bite. It was estimated to be up to 30,000 newtons, which is almost twice as powerful as the bite of a large saltwater crocodile. Because of the bluntness of their teeth, they weren't suited for twisting their prey once in their grasp. But the size and shape of the teeth made them perfect for simple open and shut biting. They would have had no problem crushing hard objects such as the toughest of shells any sea turtle could offer. Just like crocodiles, the Chronosaurus is believed to have had a short neck. This may have been an adaptation to allow the beast to successfully catch small, evasive animals. Their body, in general, was fusiform and streamlined. This means it was narrowed at both ends and had very little resistance to the flow of water. The Chronosaurus was also equipped with 4 paddle-like limbs. The hind limbs were larger than the front ones. They could span approximately 7 feet in diameter. All in all, this set the Chronosaurus up to effortlessly propel itself through the waters and be an ultimate predator. Predator X, if you will? That's the name that was given to the fossil of a creature discovered near Svalbard, a Norwegian island group, in 2009. The fossil was identified as a 50-foot-long, 100,000-pound monster with a bite force of 33,000 pounds per square inch. This might be the highest bite force of any known animal. Although Predator X is yet to be classified as any specific type of animal, it was definitely a plesiosaur like the Chronosaurus. And even if it wasn't Predator X, the Chronosaurus was still most definitely a ferocious titan when it roamed Earth's oceans. The Chronosaurus actually got its name from the Greek mythological figure of Cronus, the father of Zeus. Cronus was viewed as a titan from a generation of super powerful beings. So what was it that the Chronosaurus, this terrifying monster, actually feasted on to satisfy its appetite? This creature was known to eat sea turtles, squid, and other larger marine reptiles of that time, such as elasmosaurids and ichthyosaurs. This suggests that if crocodiles existed in the realms of the Chronosaurus, they too might have turned into lunch for the beast. There's evidence from the fossil remains of the Chronosaurus that suggests that they also feasted on sharks, which I know is a disappointment to those of you who view that beast as the king of the ocean. Not when the Chronosaurus was around, my friend. In any case, grounding all kinds of food into small pieces to help digest them would have been difficult without small teeth. This explains the presence of rounded stones found in many of the remains of these sea creatures. Researchers believe these stones may have been swallowed to control buoyancy or to help process food. It's also entirely possible they were accidentally swallowed while feeding on other animals from the seafloor. As if the Chronosaurus even needed to be a meanie with its already existing power and size, there's also evidence to suggest that it indeed might have been. It turns out that after using all its impressive attributes to catch its dinner, the Chronosaurus first liked to play with its food, like a cat does with a mouse. I guess since the hunt was so easy for them, they needed to get their fun from somewhere else. Well, I think now you should have a good idea about these creatures. So let's ask ourselves what it would be like if they were still around today. And by the way, why aren't they? Well, the Chronosaurus was completely finished off by the same KT meteor that took out the dinosaurs 66 million years ago. But even before this catastrophic event, They were coming under increased pressure from an even bigger and more vicious family of carnivorous marine reptiles known as mosasaurs. You can't always be a top dog, I guess, or rather, top marine reptile. But what if this never happened, and they were still roaming Earth? Well, this might be obvious, but can you imagine what kind of impact that would have on sea tourism? Based on the impact that famous movies about sharks and killer whales had, what do you think the presence of a Chronosaurus in the ocean would do to beaches? The very creature that would eat sharks and whales for breakfast. Beaches would certainly become a great place to go for a quiet walk, because nobody else would even be there. And what about such activities as boating, surfing, and scuba diving? You think anyone would dare try them, knowing that this 30-foot beast could be lurking beneath them? Let's give humans some credit and assume most of them wouldn't. This would cripple the global sea tourism industry, which is responsible for earning roughly $143 billion every year. Just to make sure this shocking point hits home, the most expensive yacht to ever roam the ocean was called the History Supreme. Its master bedroom was believed to have a statue made of T-Rex's bone and a wall made of meteorite rocks, as well as a 24-karat gold panoramic wall aquarium. Anyway, this yacht was worth nearly $5 billion, meaning you could buy 38 of them with the money lost in potential damages to sea tourism caused by the Chronosaurus. I'm sure that the yacht's owner was happy the beast never made an appearance in their luxurious aquarium. So luxurious, in fact, that some people believe the History Supreme, reportedly owned by some business genius from Malaysia, never even existed. Rumor has it that it was simply an elaborate hoax fabricated by the supposed designer. Anyway, I don't think the trouble would just stop there. People could actually be in serious danger, regardless of being near the ocean or not. No, I'm not about to tell you that this thing would grow legs, adapt to living on land, and start picking us off one by one. At least, I hope not. I'm just going to point out the damage that the Chronosaurus would inflict through its devastating impact on sea trade. In America, ocean transit accounts for 76% of national trade. On top of this, more than 100 vital pharmaceutical products originate in the sea. I'll also state the obvious and point out that the ocean is a huge food source for us humans. The presence of the Chronosaurus could have a great impact on our relationship with the ocean, something we usually take for granted.
There's a place on Earth so dangerous that even the most fearsome creatures of today wouldn't last a moment there. It used to exist in what we now call southeastern Morocco, the land called the Chem Beds. The story of this place stretches back to the Cretaceous period, about 100 million years ago. It might have looked like a beautiful place at first sight, a lush green forest, rivers glittering in the sun, until you meet some terrifying dinosaur. The lions or sharks of today are nothing compared to what the fossils show us. The Chem Beds were dominated by terrifying predators, and above them all, 3 of the largest predatory dinosaurs ever discovered. For example, Spinosaurus. This dinosaur was unlike anything you can imagine, a half reptile, half monster standing over 50 feet tall, bigger than a T-Rex. This hybrid with a crocodile-like snout and a sail on its back hunted the forests. But this dino could dive into the rivers, so not even waters were safe from it. It could catch huge fish, as if plucking them from the shallows. There was also a Carcharodontosaurus, a carnivore with the name that literally means shark-toothed lizard. Its razor-sharp teeth could slice through flesh with terrifying ease. This monster stood almost as tall as a house and was faster, stronger, and more aggressive than nearly anything that had ever walked the earth. There was also Delta Dromedus, a raptor-like dinosaur built for speed. It was a quick-moving ninja that stalked its prey with horrifying precision. Oh, and the skies were a fun place too, with all these pterosaur creatures flying around. These guys are often mistaken for flying dinosaurs, but they were actually a different kind, more like close cousins of dinosaurs. These majestic reptiles soared above the Chem Beds and had wingspans that could stretch up to 30 feet. The fingers were feathery, with a 4th finger kinda like bats. They could glide through the air so easily thanks to their super light skeleton. But it wasn't just the dinosaurs that made the Chem bed so horrifying. The waters also hid their own dark secrets. They were home to giant, terrifying fish and crocodile-like creatures. Their jaws were strong enough to crush bone, and they were lurking beneath the surface, waiting for anything unlucky enough to stumble into their path. One of the river creatures was Sarcosuchus, also called the super croc. Being about 40 feet long, it could easily swallow an adult human. Or better yet, it could take on a full-grown dinosaur and win. Its jaws snapped with unimaginable force, and no creature, not even Spinosaurus, was safe from it. Coelacanths could also hang out in the rivers. It was a monstrous predator that could easily swallow a huge fish whole. They had these creepy, icky fins that moved in a way similar to how human arms and legs move. And they could also kind of raise their heads like humans because of a special joint in their skull. Ew. Fun fact, we thought these monsters had gone extinct 60 million years ago, together with dinosaurs. But recently, we rediscovered them living and thriving in the Indian Ocean. Turns out they were just hiding in the deep waters. They probably didn't even notice the dinosaur asteroid or humans at all. Yay? Don't worry, over millions of years, they became basically harmless. They got 4 to 5 times smaller, even though they still weigh about 200 pounds. Just imagine what they were like back in the day. Chem waters were also home to giant lungfish and other creepy aquatic creatures. So you couldn't even drink or take a swim safely without getting bitten by something. Whew, what a place. Even turtles there were the size of cars. Imagine trying to survive in a world where creatures like this are literally everywhere. And I mean everywhere. This place was unique not because huge beasts lived there, but because of the sheer number of predators. You might think, it shouldn't be that easy for all these predators to hang out in one place, right? And you're right. Seems like prey was scarce there. That's even more chilling. All the predators just wandered around, hunting whatever meager life remained. And if there's none, then fighting each other. For years, scientists have wondered why it was the case. Maybe that's just how life was back then. And all corners of Earth were crazy like that. Or is there something special about this place? Some even say that maybe it's just because we only found predators' fossils, while normal friendly animals have disappeared, and that the fossil record might be skewed. But who knows? And the environment itself was just as fascinating as the beasts who lived there, just a bit more friendly. It's hard to imagine, but back in the day, this desert was a green paradise, humid and full of rivers. The heat of the sun scorched the land. The climate was hot, so hot that even the poles were warm. The weather there was extreme. Dry seasons followed by intense storms, which shaped the land and life. The giant rivers carved their way through this landscape. They stretched from the Sahara, emptying into the ancient Tethys Ocean to the north. If you were there, you'd see vast, interconnected basins, and beyond them, the central Atlantic Ocean. The floodplain stretched out beneath a sweltering sky. The rivers were just as wild as local animals, flowing lazily one day, but raging like furious beasts the next. At first, these rivers were powerful, carving deep channels through the land and creating wide sandbanks. But over time, they slowed down, and the landscape changed into shallow ponds and salt-covered flats. As water gradually faded away, it left behind a patchwork of wetlands and slow-moving waters. Right now, the Chem beds is a vast, rugged desert where time has stood still for millions of years. If you visited it, you'd see a giant escarpment, its rocky face winding along the border of Morocco and Algeria, bathed in the sun's harsh light. Beneath your feet would lie layers of fossilized history. That's one of the reasons why scientists were long fascinated with this place. It must be one of the most comprehensive collections of fossils ever discovered in northern Africa. There are fossils from other parts of Africa, of course, like Egypt's Bahariya Formation. But they don't tell us much about life during this time, not like Chem. That's all because those rivers we mentioned in hotter and drier places, they've eroded or still remain buried under the sand. The first discoveries from Chem began in the late 1940s. A scientist named Schubert uncovered bony fish fossils among the escarpment near the Morocco-Algeria border. Just a few years later, a paleontologist, René Lavoca, took things to the next level. Traveling by camelback, he scoured the desert landscape and uncovered a real treasure trove of fossils. He found the partial skeleton of a massive herbivore dinosaur. Finally, at least one peaceful creature in the Chem beds. This long-necked giant roamed the ancient river valleys and ate leaves like a good boy. For the next several decades, scientists only did small-scale fossil hunting expeditions to this place. There were modest discoveries made here and there. Then, in the 1970s, German paleontologist Helmut Alberti led his team to the Chem beds, and that's when things took a wild turn. They uncovered fossils of prehistoric fish, crocodiles, dinosaurs, and pieces of the infamous Spinosaurus. Imagine being one of the scientists on that team. They were probably jumping from excitement. By the mid-1990s, the fossil game changed dramatically. Incredible new species were identified from the Chem beds. Over the years, the discovery pace has only accelerated. Paleontologists, armed with new tools and techniques, have uncovered more fossils than ever before, and there's only more to come.